My name is Joanna Cuscaden, and I was fortunate enough to receive a grant from VPLA and Peat Limited to study policy responses to the issue of car dependency in Melbourne. This study was based on the juxtaposition of two American cities renowned for the good and the bad of car dependency, Los Angeles in California and Portland in Oregon. Findings of the study offers a number of implementable planning and policy considerations that could apply to Melbourne as a starting point for conversation on how to begin addressing the issue of car dependency from a planning and policy perspective. Acknowledgements must firstly go out to the planning officers in LA and Portland who have contributed immensely to this study, and also to Brodie Blades, who has equally contributed to this research and research findings. The key issue underpinning the planning concept of car dependency is the concept that oil is a finite resource.
An increase in the scarcity of oil and the associated increase in the market value of petrol accumulating in peak oil scenario will place petrol-powered personal automobile transit out of the reach of the masses. From a planning perspective, this will manifest in socially isolated communities and fractured settlements, particularly for lower income households traditionally located within peri-urban fringe communities. The concept of peak oil marks an especially significant problem for households that depend on their vehicle to access employment and social opportunities. In response to studies such as this, planning policy has increasingly centred around the implementation of new urbanist planning principles such as transit-orientated development and an increase in residential densities in appropriate locations. However, at the same time, recent planning developments, including expansion to Melbourne's urban growth boundary, the logistical inclusions, state investment in road over rail east-west link, the preservation of existing suburban densities, the new residential zones, and in particular the neighbourhood residential zone, and the facilitation of the entrenched consumer Australian dream mentality of detached suburban house and backyard, all call into question Melbourne's preparedness for a scenario in which personal car travel is unviable. Los Angeles was selected as a case example for the study of the impact of car dependency, as it has long been regarded as perhaps the leading global example of a car-orientated city.
Renowned for its spaghetti freeways, constant smog, and as a physical manifestation of the consumerist American dream culture, Los Angeles is in fact the most densely populated city in the United States and is home to some 17 million residents over 1,215 square kilometres. Unsurprisingly, it is estimated that approximately 86% of trips in Los Angeles are made by the private automobile, with ridership on public transport receiving a mode share of just 10%. This is when compared to New York City, which has a ridership of over 40%. We learned that Los Angeles is committed to planning for and investing in various transit projects that would affect a shift in the manner in which people commute for the long term.
There is a bottom-up political will from the constituents of Los Angeles to effect meaningful change. In 2008, Los Angeles voters recently approved a range of taxation mechanisms committing a projected $40 billion to traffic relief and transportation upgrades throughout the city. Entitled Measure R, voters signalled a willingness to financially contribute to bring transit projects and infrastructure to fruition through sales taxes over a 30-year timeframe. When combined with other county taxation mechanisms, namely MAP 21, Proposition A and Proposition C, solidifies bottom-up financial commitment for transit investment.
Secondly, LA has also prepared draft strategies which focus around encouraging alternative transportation, including enhancing walkability, bicycle networks, maintaining an affordable price point for public transport, implementation congestion tax, and increasing ridership of the public transit network.
The Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority and the State of California are currently working on a number of fundamental strategies designed to connect more of Los Angeles with the public transport system and to improve the cycling and walking experience. Importantly, these strategies are directed at giving residents a tangible transport alternative to the motor vehicle. Within this context, the First Last Mile Strategic Plan advocates for the development of a rail system with stations that will be a short distance of 4.8 kilometres or less from the homes of 7.8 million people. The plan also seeks to attract new patrons and increase the mode share of transit, whilst improving the transit experience of existing customers by bridging the first last mile gap, encouraging use of bicycles and walking as a means of transport by upgrading and enhancing the public realm.
LA has also sought to implement policies aimed at creating a net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. with an aim to reduce emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2020. Conversely to Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon has been considered as the textbook model of transit planning. Although much smaller in area and population, the fundamental planning principles in Portland are the same: decreasing car dependency, investing in public transit infrastructure, increasing public transport market share, and increasing land use efficiencies through proactive land use planning. Portland maintains a number of interesting and innovative transport planning mechanisms, the first of which is the capacity to fund transport projects at early stages in the development cycle. TriMet is the public authority charged with management of Portland's public transit system, consisting of buses, light rail, streetcar and heavy rail systems, has recently worked with the City of Portland and the private sector to establish better transit nodes and infrastructure for new developments and urban renewal projects alike at the start of development, through innovative funding mechanisms, investment, collaboration and development incentives.
As an example, when Portland's centrally located Oregon Health and Sciences University, a major employer and institution within the City of Portland, spatially outgrew the constraints of its mountaintop Markham Hill campus, it seemed the only viable alternative would be to vacate and relocate operations to a suburban county. Instead, TriMet, in conjunction with the City of Portland and OHSU, implemented an innovative array of funding mechanisms to pay for and construct a $60 million aerial tram from OHSU to Portland's South Waterfront Urban Renewal District. Completed in 2007, the aerial tram attracts approximately 1.6 million rides per year, is 85% operated by OHSU, and has allowed OHSU to remain within the City of Portland by expanding growth directly into the South Waterfront District.
Secondly, the innovative manner in which Portland implements its strategic metropolitan plan assists in fostering transport alternatives. Like Melbourne, Portland has an overarching strategic growth plan known as the Regional Vision, the 2040 Growth Concept, which provides a guide for the metropolitan development of the city. This plan, in conjunction with the City of Portland's Portland Plan, consists of familiar concepts such as polycentric decentralisation of growth and the implementation of a UGB. However, unlike Melbourne, Portland's Metropolitan Plan is administered by an elected regional government consisting of public custodians called Metro. The Metro agency serves more than 1.5 million residents in Portland's Clackamas and other counties, and consists of a regionally elected president and 6 councillors who are elected by district every 4 years in non-partisan elections. Portland's elected Metropolitan Council was the first to form in the United States and still stands as the most successful and effective in the country. In 1992, the region's voters approved a Home Rule Charter that directed Metro to make regional growth management its primary mission. In addition to implementation of public transit for new developments and renewal projects, public policy in Oregon has also focused on locating affordable housing within established residential areas that already have good access to transit infrastructure. Investment in new infrastructure as part of new development precincts and connecting outer suburban areas to the public transport network also forms part of this strategy. In order to encourage affordable housing within inner city areas where accessibility to public transport already exists, the Portland City Council in 2006 passed a resolution to establish policy that dedicates 30% of all tax increment financing revenues from all urban renewal districts citywide to an affordable housing set-aside fund. Calculated as a percentage of a total project expenditure in an urban renewal area, releasing housing opportunities preserved for households with incomes below 80% of median family income. To date, the fund has been used to meaningfully develop affordable and community housing within established areas, which assists in bolstering Portland's resilience to a peak oil scenario through the inclusion of lower income households in inner and middle ring established areas. This is combined with a policy of complete streets under the Portland Plan, where one has safe and convenient access to goods and services needed in daily life without the need for use of the private automobile. Complete Streets advocates for the development of a variety of housing options, retail opportunities, education facilities, commercial services, recreation facilities, and affordable active transport modes within established urban areas as a means of creating polycentric Portland. An important element of a complete neighbourhood is that it is built at a walkable and bikeable human scale and meets the needs of people of all ages and abilities.
So from all of this, what can Melbourne learn? Firstly, establishing a Metropolitan Council. In Portland context, Metro is an agency of elected representatives responsible for the implementation of the city's strategic plan. By depoliticising the strategic planning process, Portland is able to effectively implement many of the strategic directions that Melbourne cannot, such as the UGB rigidity and truly decentralised transit-orientated polycentric growth. An elected agency similar to Portland's Metro could have a role to play within the Melbourne context to work with the community in developing a truly bottom-up strategic plan decoupled from state political cycles, aimed at capping sprawl and reducing car dependence. Such an agency would also become responsible for the implementation of strategic directives, regardless of state political agenda. Secondly, implementation of proactive, innovative funding mechanisms to supply transit at the start of development. Portland has made use of innovative funding mechanisms, including developer incentives, innovative developer contributions, and PPPs, to work with the private sector in the provision of transit at the start of development projects. Further investigation into mechanisms such as this could identify the parameters for replicating this approach within the Melbourne context, particularly within our growth areas where levels of car dependence and social isolation are at their highest. Thirdly, constituent contributions for transit investment. In the case of Los Angeles, voters have elected to contribute to enhanced transit infrastructure and services through taxation, Measure R. Assuming political bravery is not an obstacle, the willingness of the community to financially contribute to transit projects in Melbourne through personal and/or sales taxation should be determined by the state, and if viable, implemented in conjunction with state and federal investment. Finally, complete streets. Decentralisation planning policy implemented in conjunction with affordable housing statutes. Whilst Plan Melbourne and its predecessor, Melbourne 2030 or Melbourne at 5 million, advocate for the establishment of activity centre hierarchies with a range of local goods and services as a means of reducing the need for car travel, the reality of this planning approach, combined with market forces, has been the continued displacement of lower income households towards Melbourne's peri-urban regions in vulnerable car-dependent clusters. However, in the case of Portland, decentralisation of planning policies are coupled with stringent set-aside development requirements for affordable housing within established urban areas. By replicating this stringent affordable housing development quotas within the Melbourne context, in conjunction with the existing decentralisation of planning policies, those most vulnerable to peak oil isolation could afford to live closer to established goods and services within Melbourne's existing footprint, and thus become less car dependent. Thank you and good evening.